Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So last week I had an interesting journey, travelling from Manchester to the monastery on the hottest day. So it was only 32 degrees in Manchester. So my first, I have a bus pass now, so my first journey on the bus for half an hour. And, there's no air conditioning really on the bus. But I went upstairs because usually downstairs there's the elderly people, probably less able to get upstairs than me. I only had my shoulder bag. And so I go upstairs and I look which side is the sun coming in and then sit behind the little window that opens. So I managed to, get in a bit of airflow on the upstairs in the bus. So that was the first leg. Then I get to Manchester Piccadilly station. And it's all glass, these stations now, it's all glass overhead. So it's hot. So I was a bit early, so the train hadn't come in. So I sat on the platform. I started sweating then. But then the train came in, got on the train, it was cool again. Then the train had problems, the heat-related problems, and the train eventually was delayed by 1 hour and 20 minutes because it had to stop more often, had to go slower than usual. Then I arrived in London on the Underground, which is pretty hot, and onto Waterloo Station. Get to Waterloo Station, the next train cancelled, and the next one that was sort of advertised was about 50 minutes. And again, Waterloo Station, it's all glass above, so it's like a heat trap. But I had a strategy. See, somebody kindly gives me a Costa card. And I know on Waterloo Station there's a Costa shop, and there's a room upstairs where you can sit. So I went down there, and with the Costa card I got an iced coffee. I went upstairs and, wow, it's air-conditioned. So I sat there and drank this cold coffee, waiting for the next train. That was all right. Then, make the way to the train, quite crowded because the train before was cancelled. Sat on the train, and over the sound system say, the driver hasn't turned up yet. So we're waiting there for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Sorry, the driver's not turned up yet. There's another train on this platform if you want to go for that one because it's uncertain about the driver. So I thought I'd just wait, see if the driver turned up. But eventually said, no, best you all get off this train and get on the next train. So went to the next train. absolutely packed out. And anyway, it set off. A lot of people standing, and managed to get a seat. But then, the air condition failed in the train. And, it's like being in a sauna with your clothes on. I'm part of my rules, I can't take my robes off, So, sat for an hour and a half on a very hot train, contemplating the beads of sweat coming down the face, and feeling very hot. But, what the message in this for me is that, people can get very upset about these sort of things, but, this is life, isn't it? We're not in control of this thing called life. Right? Trains are not always on time, things are not always on time, but we can sort of expect that, can't we? Everything to work properly, everything to be on time. But then if we have that sort of attitude, then we suffer. Get upset when things are not going the way we want them to. So this is the way I contemplate. So, just adapting to the conditions. And then you can be at peace with the conditions. So the most challenging one was the last journey on the hot train. But what I contemplated is, even though the body's hot, can you keep the mind cool? So I contemplated the breath and, and inner air conditioning. And that really helps, is that you maintain some sort of peacefulness. If you get hot in the mind and hot in the body, then, that's really difficult. So, how to more keep the mind cool even if the body's hot. But, I sweat really easy, and I was absolutely drenched at the end of the journey, but I was all right. So I like this term, one of Ajahn Chah's talks, living in the world with Dhamma. And, really be realistic about, the way life is in the world. Things sometimes don't go the way we plan, or we want them to. And, if we're foolish, we get upset. If we're wise, we adapt to the conditions. So on one occasion, I was in Waterloo, waiting, arrived in Waterloo, and the trains were again delayed by up to an hour, they said, because of signal problems. And so, I didn't have my Costa card in those days, but at least it wasn't too hot. So I just stood on the platform waiting for the train. And this gentleman came up to me. He was really angry. And he said, "You may, be at peace with this, but I want to strangle somebody." So he suffered over it. But I've done a lot of travelling over the years, and sometimes things are not on time, things get cancelled. One time I was with a lay supporter, and we were travelling from Thailand to Malaysia. and we got to the airport, but because of circumstances, we couldn't get on the plane, and we couldn't get on the plane till the next day. So he decided, stay in the airport hotel for a night and get on the plane the next day. And I did comment to him that you handled it very well. You didn't get upset about it. And he did say that when he was a businessman, if this had happened, he would have got really angry. But now, because of his Dharma practice, he could just adapt to the changing conditions. So I complimented on that. The fruits of Dharma practice, how to adapt without suffering. So, before I go on a journey, I do contemplate. Okay, this is a plan, but we'll see what happens. I'm not in control, ultimate control of things. If conditions are supportive, things will go according to plan. If they're not supportive, then one has to adapt. It's quite natural for us to, in terms of these worldly dhammas we experience, to want the pleasant aspect of the worldly experiences and not to have the unpleasant. So in Buddha's teaching, we do talk about these worldly dhammas of praise and blame, fame and disrepute. Happiness, nice experience, unpleasant experiences. Gain and loss. And this is what we all have to experience as human beings. Nobody's exempt from these worldly dhammas. But if we cling to the pleasant, these pleasant worldly dhammas, then that seems to condition us towards suffering over the unpleasant worldly dhammas. So this was very much my tendency before coming into contact with more of the wise teaching of the Buddha. Getting all excited when things are going well and down in the dumps when things weren't going well. In fact, one of my friends once said to me, my nickname was Woody, Woody in those days. Said, Woody, I don't understand you. 1 minute you open the clouds, next minute you're down the dumps. Well, just getting, clinging to the pleasant experiences. Or getting high when people say nice things to you. Getting a bit down when people say something not nice to you. Feeling good when everybody likes you, feeling depressed when somebody doesn't like you, gain something, you get happy, lose something, sad. And then, the sensory experience, always wanting pleasant sensory experience. And then when that's not there, you just feel bored and restless because you depend on that. There's a song when I was at university. I think it was by a group called Genesis. And one of the phrases in that song that stood out for me, and I think because it reminded me of me, was at the time, it says, and you'll be the one who was laughing, except when things weren't going your way. So it stuck in my mind. I could relate to that. But then, if you really begin to really contemplate things and find a bit more balance in one's life, and later, practicing Dhamma, I came across a saying which I felt something better to aspire towards. And this little poem I came across, it said, this poem goes, "It's easy enough to be happy when life flows along like a song. But the one worthwhile is the one who can smile when everything goes dead wrong." I thought that's something more to aspire towards. How to be at peace when things are not going the way we want them to. And less sense of trying to control things to be in a certain way. I think modern day life, maybe it's technology and things where we can control so much. We can fall into this, I think, a bit of an illusion that we're in control of things. And, then there's, suffering that can come from that. So with Dhamma, I think you always find learning lessons, especially in this sense of control. One of the things we maybe try to control is people close to us. Make them happy. If they're going through difficulties, put things right for them. But, we can't always do that. One of the things when I, some enthusiasm for Dhamma practice was trying to convert my father to Buddhism, or convert him to be a bit more religious. He was a staunch atheist. And I used to go home at Christmas to try and convert him, and we'd just get into arguments, and I'd come away, wouldn't feel good. I remember one Christmas, going home at Christmas, and having a difficult time, and then going straight to a retreat over New Year with Luang Por Sumedho in Oxford. And during that retreat, Luang Por Sumedho said a phrase that really hit home with me. He said in a talk, he said, "Wanting people to be other than they are is suffering." And that was what I could see. That I wanted my father to be different from the way he was. But this doesn't mean now I just gave up trying to sort of encouraging somebody in terms of, more skillfulness or wise reflection. But I tend to use the word more like trying to steer people rather than control people. Because definitely you want to, try to support and point people in the right direction. But if you get too controlling, it doesn't seem to work. As the saying goes, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So you can, try to manifest the right conditions, bring them to the water, but really it's up to the person in the end, isn't it? To follow one's, maybe good advice, but some people won't. Living in a community is a very good exercise in letting go of control. Yeah, there's so much in life and community you can't control. People you're with, what you want to do, what you want to eat, or many things, you just have to join in what the people around you are doing. I do observe that, certain situations feel to put in there in terms of the way I think it should happen. I even had an example of this at the Talpa Pa last weekend. So on previous Talpa Pas, because there's so many people, we asked the people to all assemble around the stupa, and then the Sangha come and walk around. So I come over just before the circumambulation, and everybody's queuing up here. I thought, why is everybody at the stupa? I said, Ajahn, why is everybody at the stupa? He said, it's just, that's where they decide to do it. So I just let go. And it worked all right, actually. It was all right. We managed. So sometimes the way we think it should happen is not always the only way that things can work. And, I find it also good to observe in certain situations. You might want to change it to be a bit different, but to watch that in one's mind that wants to control the situation, control the people. And, if we observe that and let go, then we just can be more at peace with things. And I think so much to learn from the community in this way. What people can show us. Now, sometimes in meditation, when we have a bit more time for solitude, you can experience a sort of peacefulness. And sometimes, experience that peacefulness, we don't want to do anything. We don't want to interact because it disturbs that peacefulness. But, it's limited. And, at Christmas time, we used to have these, domes, didn't we? That you had a Disneyland castle inside. You used to shake them up, and the snow would come and obscure the castle. And then you hold it still, and then the snowflakes fall, and you see the castle clear. So, it's a bit like, meditation. We can experience a sort of a peace and stillness, and a moment of sort of clarity that comes from that. It's actually seeing things a bit more clearly. But then we start to interact, things get stirred up again. Then things get a bit obscured again. We can't see things as clear as we did. But that's what we have to learn. Really, how to remove the snowflakes. Not just to hold something still so that they fall to the bottom, and how to remove them. And that's the whole process, learning to know some of these habits of mind that often can arise in our interactions in community. Know them, understand them, and how to reflect wisely with them. To know them, how to reflect wisely, then these habits can lose their power over the mind. We can divide, through mindfulness and wisdom, we get a wise perspective on habits. But if we're not willing to experience them, how can we learn? But if we're willing to experience what comes up in our community interactions, learn from them, Because ultimately, to come to the point where you can shake the dome and the castle's still clear. That's the perfect. That's where what the sort of practice we aim towards, not just the clarity when we're still. So I found community life, and learned so much from it. Sometimes it's not been easy. Once I did nearly run away, but I'm glad I stuck with it. And through the practice now, just sometimes in this term control, sometimes people use it with meditations about controlling the mind. But, if that means holding the mind in a certain way, I don't think that's possible. My experience of the mind is that some days are good, some days not so good. But I can, sense of controlling is just learning to just know the way the mind is, know the impermanence of these mind states, and know how not to keep them going, how to wisely reflect and not get into the types of thinking that tend to keep these habits going. This is what I've learned. And through sometimes having to bear with difficult mind states. And that's the thing really about monastic life, you don't have the distractions. So, really this is what, you have to, learn to confront some things, some habits. I can see the temptation to want to maybe live a monastic life on one's own terms, but, how much will we learn from that? Maybe some who can do it that way, but I think for a lot of us, having, spiritual friendship and people around us practicing is very, so important. Not really be able to do things our own terms all the time. And I think we do come into our life in the monastery with some sense of trying to control things. And that can be difficult, when lots of things are happening around us and we're losing this sense of control. Can be quite difficult. But if we're willing to stay with it, learn from it, maybe we'll come to the same situation again in a few years and minds at peace. Can be peaceful with the conditions around. So this is, to me, is really a sense of how we've developed the practice. If we can come into a situation that once we found difficult and challenging, but now we can be more at peace and accept it, that's a real sign of the practice is working. The fruits of the practice. So, the willingness to experience all aspects of of life, finding that balance, not getting carried away with the pleasant things, not getting dragged down by the unpleasant things, strengthen the mind with mindfulness and wisdom to find that balance. Understanding the way the world is. And if we're wise, then we can be more at peace with the changing conditions of life. So, that's all for these reflections this evening.